Welcome everyone, you're listening to Nephology, the podcast dedicated to crypto, accounting, business, finance and much, much more. I'm Joe David, the founder of Nephos Group in Minor. Please note that all conversations recorded are professional opinions, and if you'd like to know more or gain support, please reach out to the team directly. Now on to the next episode. Hello everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the Nephology podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Erika today. Erika, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
No worries, thanks for coming. So Erika, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about you and your journey and what brought you here?
Sure. So I guess you and I connected over our mutual work in the Web3 crypto space. So where I sit on it from is a legal point of view. So I've been working as a lawyer for 7 years. I started in the banking finance, traditional teams, private practice. I moved a little bit in-house and then I kind of migrated a little bit into corporate commercial. And in my endeavors moving from Australia to Dubai, I found a hub or a network here of really Web3 centric kind of businesses and people. And it was something I'd been interested in on a personal capacity. I'd never kind of dabbled in it on a work front for many years. My husband's actually quite deep in the space. So he kind of dragged me down the rabbit hole with him. And I think having had that banking finance background, especially spaces like DeFi, really interested me in terms of their potential, the way they could revolutionize the space. It just really captivated me. So when I moved here, I got this interesting opportunity to bring that Web3 interest into my professional work. So I've been working with a lot of Web3 projects, from funds to SaaS companies to gaming projects. So that's been really, really interesting. And kind of in tandem with that, I have an e-commerce business in Australia. It's in the sporting and fitness space, so another love and interest of mine. And then I have a podcast as well. So we also have that common touch point.
Yeah.
And that's actually got nothing to do with law or crypto. No. It's more in the self-development space. And that's kind of been a personal development project of mine, which is basically my curiosity shared with the world.
Yeah.
So it's been a massive learning space for me, and I've been able to connect with amazing people. So that's basically what takes up all my time.
Yeah, no, well, it sounds like you've got a lot to take it up. And I totally agree with you. You know, I say to a lot of people, one of the huge benefits of podcasts is you get to sit in front of amazing people and hear about their journeys and their stories. And actually, as the kind of, I guess, the person hosting it, you actually selfishly get to, you know, suck up and sponge a lot of that, you know, information that you're also providing out to other people. So I find it a great way to connect with amazing people as well.
Agreed.
So, and we'll touch on your podcast a bit later. So what brought you to Dubai? I mean, we just spoke on the way up here. You know, just come back from a fairly long trip back to Australia, and I asked you, are you ready to go back? And you were kind of like, do you know what? It's nice to be back here and you know, do what I need to do in Dubai. But what brought you here in the first place?
So, as I said, hubby kind of is in the crypto Web3 space. He was actually a chiropractor before.
Okay.
And he, just on a personal capacity, he's kind of self-taught himself. Crypto Web3 means it's not something you can really study in any way. It's just like a learn as you go and hope for the best type situation. So it kind of just made sense for us to be here. And I always really wanted to move overseas. As a lawyer, I'm quite fortunate because I feel it's a profession that I can really pick up and work anywhere. And I didn't actually know this before moving here, but the court system here is actually common law based, which means that it's quite similar to a lot of the precedent, like the contracts that we draft, the way the legal system is kind of structured. Common law is the same as UK and Australia. So for me, it was quite an easy move. So we moved here for kind of the opportunity to just have something different. I always wanted to live overseas. The tax situation here is obviously quite desirable when you're coming from, you know, somewhere like Australia or the UK. Weather's great. It was also off the back of COVID. So for us, having been locked down for almost 2 years on and off in Oz.
Yeah, it was quite hard in Australia as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, which is so separate from the rest of the world. We kind of had this epiphany that if this happens again or it's ongoing, we're missing out on a lot of time just being able to see the world. So we thought, let's just move to Dubai. It's so central. We can travel a lot. So a lot of things kind of aligned. And moving here is really opened up my eyes and been a lot more fruitful than what I had anticipated. I'd never been here before. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's been a really eye-opening experience.
And how long have you been here now?
Almost 3 years.
3 years, wow. Yeah. And I'm the same, when I came here, it was very much like eye-opening experience of like what the world and different culture, and I said to you before we came on, is like, I don't really fully know what the Australian culture is and how it works and what people are like. And because I've never been there, it does feel a little bit, to me, being from the UK, it feels that bit kind of too far away and all those sorts of things, right? So that's what I love about being here is like, I don't think we've had two guests in a row, for example, that have been from the same background or the same culture, or, it's just an amazing mix. And my kids at school, they've got, different cultures as friends. And I think that's really like super important to have that as well. And it definitely opens your eyes.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I always thought Australia was multicultural, but this city is on another level.
Yeah.
So different.
Yeah, I mean, people would say the UK is multicultural, but again, it's a totally different, and it's not just the different cultures. I think it's actually that everybody wants to be here, and therefore everybody kind of works together to make it like a multicultural place that everybody is part of, if that makes sense. So all the different cultures are kind of celebrated and are looked after and all of those different things. Whereas you can go to other places like the UK where, maybe certain cultures aren't looked at in the same light. And so there may be a lot of them there, but actually they don't get the recognition or the gratitude or the kind of opportunity to develop as other places like here do.
Sure.
Yeah. So, and I guess, because crypto is my favorite subject,
Who would have guessed?
Yeah. Let's dive into the crypto. And we're in a good spot. I mean, as we're recording, I don't know exactly what date this will go out, but as we're recording, Bitcoin's gone over 100K today.
Yep.
So
quite a monumental day.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've had a few messages from people saying time to celebrate.
Yeah.
And
I woke up with my husband throwing a chart in my face. He's like, it's the day.
It's the day. So let's talk about crypto. So you mentioned that your husband was kind of, was he investing in it? Was he working in it?
He was kind of trading / investing. Yeah.
So that kind of, you just heard him talking about it and it kind of dragged you into that tech world. But as a lawyer, was the first thought like, not concern as such, but like, was the first thought like, how does this even, like, how am I even going to comprehend how this thing that has no real legal boundaries and structures, how am I going to comprehend the legal framework around that? Was it difficult in the first instance?
Yeah, I think when I was learning about, self-custody, removing intermediaries, how banks could become redundant, the opportunities that different DeFi projects were presenting, I thought it was so interesting. But then I thought, how's this actually going to integrate into real world? And initially, I was kind of thinking about the whole Web3 space, right? Decentralization is a massive component of it. The fact that you don't have any one person in control, people have autonomy over their own things. I thought, how's this going to work in the world we have today? And where I've kind of landed is, I know that there's a big, portion of people who are anti-regulation and anti-laws because it does go against the grain of that decentralized heart. However, I do think it's necessary if it is going to be mainstream. I do think we need some sort of... So I kind of, at the beginning, was in this middle place where I was like, I can appreciate why regulation and laws would go against the heart of what it's trying to do, but I can also see why it would be necessary. And, being a champion of the space and the potential it has, I kind of thought that's going to be necessary to make it work. But I do think a big challenge, I'm sure we're going to go into this deeper, is the pace at which the industry is moving and developing and innovating. Like, the laws and regulators are just so far behind. And I think they need to have some element of flexibility. I mean, I do think there's some regulators doing a really good job, but I just think, I wasn't a lawyer when the internet came out, but I can only imagine it would have been something similar where people are just trying to wrap their heads around what it is. And by the time they do that, it's moved 20 paces ahead. So it's a really interesting space. But initially, to answer your question, I was really trying to think about the intersection of how is this going to become mainstream? Because I see the potential, but I don't really see how it's going to integrate.
Yeah, I get that. Because obviously we're in similar fields in a sense of professional services, us doing the accounting side, but for us as an accountant, we're not so much concerned about we are concerned about regulation, obviously, but we're not so much concerned about the regulation when we're transacting it. We're kind of more concerned about what's actually happening with the numbers and how do we reflect that in somebody's financial statements, right? So for us, we're kind of transacting what's happened in the most accurate way we can. But for you, when you're drafting a contract or when you're drafting a structure for somebody, or like, you're kind of putting that together to make sure there's some legal basis to what you're doing, right? We all hear the phrase, or we do in the UK anyway, but like, it's not worth the paper it's written on, right? There must have been a point initially where it wasn't worth the paper it was written on, because actually what regulation were you tying it to? Or like, how were you able to, do you see what I mean? Like, how were you able to structure these kind of contracts and stuff in the earlier days?
Well, I think initially, like, you have to appreciate, it was really a wild, wild west. It was a case where people could just launch projects and they had no legal wrappers. They weren't tied to any jurisdiction, and it just kind of worked because there was no oversight. There was no regulators that really were understanding what was going on. But the problem is, you had then years down the track, I'm not sure if you heard of the Oki DAO case in the US.
No.
But basically it was a DAO that was set up many years ago in this wild, wild west kind of era. And many years later, the regulators then came back to them retrospectively and said, actually, what you did at that time was financial activity. You were running a security kind of scheme, and therefore we're going to fine you, and because you were basically doing regulated activity without a license. So I think at the beginning, people weren't really thinking about structuring and licensing and legal wrappers, because it wasn't really necessary, so to speak. It was just like, oh, we've created this thing. It exists online. It's separate to me.
Yeah.
But the issue you then had, like in this particular example, is when the regulators kind of caught up, they then go, okay, who are the holders of these tokens? Who are the founders?
Who controls
And they
it?
become personally liable. So that's kind of the importance of now having a legal wrapper. You can't just operate. Like, the risk is, if you think you can operate these projects or these securities in effect with no wrapper, you run the risk of the people that invest in your project being personally liable for these things. And we're fortunate now that many jurisdictions have a lot clearer frameworks. So you can say, okay, you know what, I know I can do it in this jurisdiction. I'm just going to set it up there and kind of offer myself that protection. So yeah, in the beginning, it's only something I've really been doing for the last couple of years, because I don't think it was something people seriously considered before that. And I don't think countries had the frameworks to actually allow people to do it.
And I guess that's the point, isn't it? The kind of the regulation, if there's no regulation, it's very hard for somebody to go after somebody against something, because what is their legal, but same way I'm saying, what's your legal basis for drafting a contract? What's their legal basis to go after somebody if there's nothing there to do it? So I guess you're right. The regulation and the laws had to develop together, I guess, at the same time.
And what they did, sorry, just before we move on, what they kind of did was they said, okay, we don't have a framework for this exact thing, but at its essence, at its core, we can box it into what is existing, the existing framework we've got, which is it fits into the security basket. Therefore, they're in breach of our existing regulations. So there's a huge risk for people operating without a legal wrapper that retrospectively they will, because that's the only option they've got. Without crypto or virtual asset specific regulations, they'll just push you into an existing class of regulation they've got. So
and that though creates challenges for itself, right? Because we've all seen, and crypto people are delighted at the fact that Gary Gensler is going to leave the SEC. The Trump election was always going to mean that was going to happen. But ultimately, and I'm going to get abused by anyone I know in the crypto space with this comment, but ultimately, if you look at the fundamentals of what a security are, it's hard to argue that the majority of crypto tokens are not securities.
Yeah.
And the fact that the SEC haven't had as much luck on some of these larger tokens, I don't think necessarily shows that they aren't securities, because if you look at the definition of what a security is, most of them do fall under that category. I think it was more from the crypto community side, maybe the aggression, that it looked like it was, we hate you, therefore we're going to go after you.
Yeah, it was like this punish mentality, kind of drive everyone out of the US.
Rather than
let's collaborate and understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So does that come with that challenge of we're boxed? Because I'm saying, based on the traditional test of what a security looks like, crypto falls into that. But do we need to have a different definition for what a crypto security looks like versus what I'm not asking you to rewrite the laws, but like, is it right to put these things in the same box as other things, or should we be looking at it as a different asset class completely?
I've always said I think crypto assets fall into that definition like a circle fits in a square. It fits, but there's so many gaps and extra room that kind of haven't been filled. Like I think for simplicity's sake and for the fact that a lot of jurisdictions have not developed specific virtual asset class groups or regulations, like it works, but I don't think it's the solution. I do think we need to develop, like, in the UAE, they've got virtual asset specific laws. That's a great start, because I think you need to appreciate that it does operate a little bit differently. It does have different components, and alongside that, if we stretch it to structuring, it goes even further, because if you have something like a DAO, you can't just set it up as a company or a foundation. It doesn't always work specifically like that, but that's kind of the best we've got. So I think over time, like the next 10 years will be really interesting for this space. Again, with the Trump election, I think they're going to put a big emphasis on this space. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of target the space and create regulations around it specifically. I don't think it fits perfectly. I guess it works for now.
Yeah, and I think that's the critical point is we are still very early. People forget that. I know Bitcoin's been around for a long time now, but in reality, we're still very, very early. And that people forget.
Yeah.
And I think that if we looked at any asset class, in the first kind of 15, 16, whatever years it is of that asset class, to be where we are today is significant, kind of movement and things. And people are expecting, 0 to 100 in 15 years. That's not going to happen. It needs time. It needs to develop. And I'm sure it's the same for you. The projects we're talking to, the people we're talking to today versus what we were talking to 2 years ago are significantly different level, different caliber, really kind of want to do things properly. It still is a Wild West, but it's definitely got a lot of that shaken off it now, and we've got much more professional people in the space. Yeah,
and I think we have regular, like especially in our part of the world, the UAE, I think we have virtual asset specific regulation to thank for that, because people are like, okay, I want to do it properly. There is a framework. How do I do it properly? And they're more sophisticated and want to have that stamp of approval from, now that you've got a lot of scams and people rugging projects and stuff like that, they want to come in with that stamp of authority to say, actually, we're regulated by an institution that has been around. They're a proper financial regulator that gives them that authenticity or credibility as a project, which in this space, I think is important to distinguish yourself from everyone else who's just launched a meme coin.
Yeah. And that was what I had in my head was meme coins, in that I'm in a group with some people, and there was a message on there last night, I know the founders of this project. They've told me that this is going to happen, and it hasn't happened the way they told it. I'm not sure if the founders are doing something wrong. I'm not sure. And I'm just like, this is just that, because there's nothing really that they're actually basing this on. It's just literally speculation and hype and all those sorts of things. So if we don't try and protect some of that, we are just going to end up with a whole world of meme coins and speculation and no real value. And as we all know, crypto is just one component of blockchain, but blockchain gets tagged with crypto.
Yeah.
And therefore, if crypto becomes bad in a sense of, meme coins and rug pulls and things like that become the norm, then the opportunity we have with blockchain could get lost with it as well, which is a worry, I think, for the space. Just on the kind of global picture, you've mentioned Vara a couple of times, and maybe we could just talk about, what they're doing here versus what they're doing in other parts of the world. There are a few other now things like Mika. There are other few kind of regulators that are taking it more seriously. I'm assuming here you feel is the most advanced in that sense with Vara.
So I actually don't know if this is accurate or not, but I believe that Vara is the only virtual asset specific regulator. There are many regulators that have brought in virtual asset regulations, i.e. MICA, ADGM, they have virtual asset regulations within their financial kind of regulations. But Vara is the first one that's been set up specifically for virtual asset. And I think that's a really positive step, because it acknowledges and appreciates that this actually is separate to everything else we've understood, and it deserves a whole separate, regulator to really understand it properly. So I think that's a very positive thing. I think there are a lot of competing jurisdictions for the top crypto hub in the world. I mean, you talk to anyone in the UAE, they'll say the UAE. You speak to people in Switzerland, they'll say it's Switzerland. So I think it depends. Like when I have a client come to me and they want to set up a project, I think because of the nature of crypto and projects, they're all basically online. We're not talking about I need a brick and mortar store in the middle of Dubai.
Yeah.
It's a lot of online stuff. So where they set up is more depending on their regulatory appetite. It depends on, how sophisticated do they want to be seen? Because if you're going with somewhere like the UAE or Switzerland versus Cayman BVI, the barrier to entry is a lot different. The cost is a lot different, but your credibility also goes alongside that. So I think there's different jurisdictions that serve different purposes. I think what's happening in the UAE is amazing. And I saw this chart and it said something like 25% of worldwide crypto holders are in the UAE, which is huge considering how small it is. So I do think it's a hub for that space, projects, individuals who are interested in it. I do think they've done a great job at making it crypto friendly.
Yeah.
Versus somewhere like the US who's come at it with regulatory fangs and really driven people out of the space, although I think that is likely to change now. So yeah, I think globally the UAE is doing a great job, but it's not always the answer for a project. It really just depends on different things they're considering. Like I said, there's many options.
Yeah, and I guess just to be clear as well, Vara is only Dubai, right?
Correct.
I said UAE, but it's actually
it is
Dubai.
Just Dubai. So if you're looking at ADGM, which is another financial regulator, that's separate to Vara, and you'd be sitting under a different regulator.
Yeah. So on that note, when a project comes to you and they say, look, I want to launch this project and I want a token and I want to do this, that, and the other. Are you these days, and obviously I'm talking very high level here, but are you these days able to launch a token in Dubai, in the UAE, or is it still, because we have a lot of clients where they might have a token issuance out of maybe less regulated jurisdiction, a BVI, Cayman, Panama, etc., and then maybe an opco or a development company onshore, let's call it. Is that still the kind of structure? Is it still more challenging to launch a token somewhere like here than other places?
So I think it goes back to kind of what I said before. It really depends on the project's appetite for a financial regulatory process. So exactly what you said, somewhere like BVI Cayman it's a lesser barrier to entry. You're still going for a regulated license, but it's not as intense as somewhere like the ADGM. So to answer your question, yes, you can launch tokens in the UAE, both utility with a DAO, both security with a company, but it's more of a full-blown regulatory process than, say, somewhere like BVI. Okay. So we have still seen offshore structures being used. Again, it just depends what makes sense. Where's the project going to be headquartered? Where are the investors likely to be coming from? If we're talking about US investors as well, that kind of changes the game as well. So it's not really a one-size-fits-all answer. I've seen a combination of both. Yeah. And it really just depends on multiple things that we tease out when I get a client come to me to understand what makes the most sense for them.
And I guess the real positive from that, though, is that, I know for the UK, for example, it's pretty much impossible to launch a token from the UK. Like there's just no way the FCA would have a function for that to be possible. But it sounds like it is potentially possible here if you hit the right regulatory requirements and you've got the right amount of money and you've got the right time to do it, which is a real positive step. Because in other jurisdictions, it's just physically impossible. Yeah. So for a modern, forward-thinking jurisdiction like this to be able to go, do you know what? We can, in certain circumstances, take the business, if you like, from an offshore jurisdiction and bring it into a kind of onshore place. I think that's a really positive thing for the area and for the space. So I guess just leading on from that, then. You mentioned about you kind of being a lawyer and whatnot. And typically, when people think about lawyers, they think about either in-house or they think about an external kind of private practice, as it were. But for you, you're kind of, I guess, a hybrid of both, right? Sure. You're kind of that fractionalized, if you want to call it, legal kind of individual. So what made you decide to take the fractionalized route versus kind of setting up a practice or something like that?
Sure. So to quickly break it down for people who don't know the difference, private practice is where you'd work in a firm and you'd be in a team. So I'd be in the tech team, the banking finance team, the corporate team, etc. In-house is where I work strictly for, Nephos Group, and I'm in-house and I'm your lawyer. I work with you full time. For me, I like both, and I do prefer in-house because, so the difference in my mind, because I've done both, is in private practice, I was kind of doing the same type of work for many different clients. In-house, I was doing more of a variety of work for one client. And I'm quite entrepreneurial in the way I think. So I really like contributing and seeing projects start to finish, seeing businesses grow, actually contributing to where they want to take it, hitting their KPIs, etc. So for me, when I moved here and I started building up a network, it kind of made sense because I really just started to build out a portfolio of clients who wanted to work with me. And I think when we're talking about Web3 crypto, a lot of them are startups. So they may not necessarily have the appetite for firm fees, paying for big teams, etc. And they may not have the appetite to hire someone full-time either. And so where I kind of come in is I work with my clients on project basis. So it might be the setup. They come to me and say, hey, this is what we want to do. How do we structure it? Where's the best place we set up? And we do that. Part and parcel of that is kind of all the contracts that go with it.
Yep.
Another aspect, once we've done that, they go off, they start their business. In a couple of months, they'll call me. They'll say, hey, we want to bring out this aspect of our we want to bring out this new product, or we want to start offering this new service. Can we do it? What do we have to change, or what do we have to get licensed for to be able to do it? What contracts do we need, etc. So I think it works because I'm kind of this middle offering between having to hire someone full time and then work with a firm. I'm someone who's personally in the space. I'm an entrepreneur myself. So I'm quite flexible and dynamic in the way I work. And I think it just works both ways. Like I get the opportunity to work with many different clients. They're not locked in with huge firm fees or retainers.
Yeah.
I just work on a project basis. So it's transparent, it's clear, it works. I can be really dynamic in the way I offer my services, and I'm a senior lawyer, but because I'm working independently, my offering is a lot different.
Yeah.
So it just works. It gives me the flexibility to work on my other things, my podcast, my business. And lastly, I was really turned off the corporate culture. And I think there's big friction with the heart of Web3 projects, the way they work. They're so casual, they're so relationship based, they're tech guys, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so different to the way corporate is. And so when I was working in a firm, I found, I don't know, it just was a bit of a mismatch. Whereas now I can manage those relationships and deal with these clients in a way that kind of suits me as well. It suits my personality.
Yeah.
Not to say it's not professional, but it just doesn't have that kind of corporate veil over it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely do know what you mean. Yeah, because that is exactly the way that we kind of, if you like, started in the crypto space. Was we were kind of giving that message of, we can be the degen in the corner with you and have a bit of a laugh and whatnot, but we can also be that professional advisor on the other side that gives you the right, kind of guidance and information. And the point of that is we're not going to sit here and go, oh, crypto, that's horrendous. Like, how could you possibly be in that space? We're going to, we're there to support you. We want to see you grow. We want to see you achieve success. And I think, the difference for me as the owner of the firm is that I can drive the direction in a sense wherever I want, right? Whereas if I worked for a practice, the partners probably aren't interested in crypto. Maybe the management are a little bit more interested, but in reality, it's then me trying to drive an agenda that everybody else has got no senior level has got no real passion for. So they might go, yeah, no worries, accept a couple of crypto clients. We have no problem with that. But are they really going to drive it forward? Are they really going to get into it and understand it? And I think that's the difference for me, and I'm sure it is exactly the same for you, is that if you've got a bit of a passion for it, you can actually really get into it and therefore I think provide better, stronger advice.
Yeah, 100%. And the beautiful thing about this space is I think anyone that calls himself an expert in crypto, I wouldn't believe them because the space is moving so quickly. And every time I speak to a client, they're doing something I've never heard of before. Yeah. They have a different idea. They're innovating. And so I'm learning so much just through working with these people. It's a very collaborative process. And I just feel the fact that I've stepped away and working on an independent basis allows me to really tap into that collaborative nature versus, I don't know, what I feel is this like very clinical client lawyer relationship. The professionalism's all there. It's just the nature of the relationship just feels a lot more collaborative. Like I'm on your team and I just want to help you guys achieve things, you know.
Which you could argue traditionally from a legal perspective, and it's the same for accounting, is that actually you're not perceived to be on the team. You're kind of perceived to be this annoying person we have to use, but we don't really want to.
Like like we've just had to tick off the legal box and call you, you know. Whereas I'm like, I'm involved at the beginning when they're ideating. I'm giving ideas. Like it's almost like I'm part of the project, which I love.
Yeah, no, and I love that as well because that's exactly the same. You know, for us is that we want that same. You know, we want to talk to them at the early stage. We want to help them, guide them. You know, get them to talk to people like you, and you know things like that. Whereas a lot of people in the more corporate world of accounting and legal are very much like, come to me when you've got a project set up and we'll cross that bridge there. We'll do some contracts for you. We'll do some accounting for you once you're set up. They're not interested in the actual kind of like how that, you know, kind of business is going to grow. And I say the same thing that you say. You know, someone's literally the other day, someone on an intro call, professional services firm, said, I hear you guys are the experts in crypto. And I was like, anyone that says they're an expert is lying because it's impossible. It's impossible to be an expert.
You could have been an expert 5 minutes ago, but you're not now.
Exactly. You know, do we have a quite a large number of clients? And am I personally quite mentally and financially invested in the crypto world? Yes. So do we know quite a lot? Yes. But we're never going to profess to be, you know, the firm that knows everything because it's impossible to do so.
100%. I think the biggest thing to look out for, whether it's lawyer, accountant, any other professional support in the space, like as a project, it's always really important for me to just see that someone's genuinely interested, be personally invested, like they're on top of what's happening in the space, and they've got a kind of beginner's mindset. And what I mean when I say that is they're constantly learning. You have to really be in the space. Like, I think this was another friction point of mine. There were a lot of lawyers in big firms that do crypto, but do they really do crypto, or do they just, you know a little bit and then offer it as a service? Like, I think, look, don't get me wrong, like projects and funds and businesses at the core of what they need is still very Web 2 based. They need corporate structuring and contracts, but that added layer of understanding what they're doing, what space they're operating in is so fundamental to, like I said, put that circle into an existing square. Like, you're trying to work within an existing framework with things that have never been done before. So working with someone who's genuinely interested, and like I said, I learn a lot from my clients and what they're trying to do. That's a very key skill, I think, to anyone you bring into your project. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's the key thing. I really like the kind of the circle and the square analogy, because it is a really, it is a really good analogy. And it's the same, from our perspective, is that we don't just talk it, we do it. So, we have a company wallet that we can use to try out different transactions. So if somebody's going on a new chain that we haven't worked on before, then we can go, okay, well, let's chuck, $50, $100 into a wallet. Let's go on that chain. Let's interact with it a little bit. Let's see how that spits out into the accounting software. Is it the same as others? Is it different? If it comes out different, how do we, so that when we actually get to work on that client's data, we've already had to play with it. We've already understood it. That's really understanding it and really kind of getting into it. It doesn't mean you know every single blockchain that's ever existed, but it means that when you do get new concepts and ideas, you're able to kind of play about with it and see what the outcome looks like. Cool. So I wanted to kind of briefly touch on smart contracts. And, you've mentioned the word contracts in this podcast quite a lot. And smart contracts is a word that's used and a definition, if you like, for, I guess, a blockchain-based contract, let's say. So I guess the first question is, are they really contracts? Like, as a legal definition of what a contract is it a bit of false advertising in that sense, calling it a contract?
Well, the basic premises of having a contract are you have an offer, acceptance, two parties signing. So if it has all those elements, then arguably, yes, it is a contract. It just exists on a tech basis. I think what's different about traditional contracts and smart contracts is kind of this automated nature of it. And what I mean by that, and I think the biggest difference is it's if X happens, then Y will happen. It's not just written, and then when the scenario plays out in real life, you have to argue and fight, maybe take it to court. It's automatically executed on a smart contract. That's a huge difference between the two, which I think presents a lot of opportunity, but there's also a few risks kind of in that as well.
Yeah, one conversation I had with someone was around, it was a conversation around the intersect of AI and crypto. And we were talking about insurance. We've got a client who's a very forward-thinking insurance company, and they're trying to bring insurance kind of documents and contracts and stuff on chain to make it much more visible, blah, blah, blah. And this guy I was talking to said, there's some kind of like car insurance providers, let's say, out there that are trialing using blockchain and smart contracts to pay out policies. So you have a bump on Sheikh Zayed Road, which happens all the time, and you basically take some pictures of the accident, the other person takes some pictures of the accident, you upload them onto the portal, and AI is then able to effectively, in most cases, determine who was at fault, and therefore is able to pay out the insurance policy based on, because the images can't lie, right? I can say you drove into me, but if the bump is on the front of my car and on the back of yours, quite clearly I didn't, or you didn't, whatever. So that I think is amazing, brings huge opportunity. Then it's also going to bring a lot of challenges, right? It's also going to bring a lot of, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of lawyers out there using that as an opportunity to try and fight things like that for their clients. And that's what worries me a little bit, is the more you automate, does it risk then people trying to, obviously it risks people trying to game the system, but does it also risk the kind of rogue, maybe professional services, lawyers, etc., trying to find an angle to go, we'll fight the computer on this? Yeah,
look, I think there are some industries where this will work incredibly, like something like paying out royalties, which is could be an automated process. It's 100%. Quite simple. This person gets a certain amount of downloads, they get paid X amount. And that's an automated process, I think is great. And it's going to work really well for things like that. Licensing, software, things like that, I think has a lot of potential to really simplify that process. I think where the challenge is in, when we're talking about contracts, there's so many clauses and conditions and warranties that even if it says, okay, if you sign this agreement, or we're offering you a service, right? Let's just say it's a 30 days money back guarantee if you don't get these certain results, and you don't get those certain results. But then there's all these caveats, subject to getting these results, you also have to comply with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are all those conditions going to be verifiable by an AI? Do you still need a manual, person to go in and check some things that may not be, that an AI may not able to check? It's not a simple yes or no. There's a lot of gray areas. So I don't know how far we're going to be able to stretch it. I think for things like automated payments and payment plans where it's quite simple and it removes the headache of having to manually do things, it has potential. But in the spaces where, like, I don't know, even construction, there's a reason that construction companies have like disputes teams and litigation and things like that, because there's so much gray area that can be argued and disputed and kind of fought over. So I don't know that it's a solution for all contracts. I think they're great. I haven't personally done many of them myself either. And I think often when we're talking about contracts, lawyers do get involved. So yeah, I've never been asked to draft a smart contract. So whether people are just using them and not getting legal eyes over them, that's a risk in and of itself.
That's what I was going to say.
It's automated, right? And once it's signed and it's set, there's no real tampering with it. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, insofar as the elements of a contract being present, I think they're legit contracts. I don't know if they're a one size fits all for contracts in general, though. And
they're definitely going to be open to, in the nicest possible way, if you've got a lawyer defending a client, and even if they're a legitimate, really kind of, proper lawyer that isn't trying to find the fault in the system, the lawyer's job ultimately, if they're defending their client in a legal situation, is to find as many opportunities to exploit that, any legal loopholes or any issues with the contract or anything, right? So I think that, like you said, is going to be a huge issue, because if it's automated on these three bases, but it missed this base over here, it's going to open people up to thinking that they're covered in a contract, and actually it's going to be very easy for companies to get out of that. And that's my worry as well. When I chatted to the guy about the insurance, I was like, ultimately who loses when an insurance policy pays out is the insuring company, right? Because they've got to physically pay cash out to cover that. They're all huge companies that have huge budgets, have legal teams in-house. Surely it's going to be difficult to get them on board with this, because they're just going to be like, well, where's the benefit to us in a sense of paying out all of these policies, when actually there may be some that we could get our lawyers to look at and dispute. And so I think that's another kind of issue, if you like, with it, is that some of these larger companies are going to end up having the budget to fight them. Some of the smaller companies who think they can rely on it actually can't. And then they end up being, and it's kind of like the corporate structure you talked about at the start. You know, are people using smart contracts for a legal purpose right now? Probably. Are many lawyers getting involved? Probably not. Are they going to stand the test of time then when it comes to it?
Maybe. And it could even be maybe like the smart contracts end up being adopted for part of the contracting process. So maybe it's like for all payment parts. So once an agreement has been reached, once a mediation's been resolved, once a dispute has been finalized, then the smart contract gets executed or activated for a payment aspect, or for the, whatever needs to happen aspect. But for these larger, kind of more complicated, with a lot of conditions, precedent, subsequent, I'm not quite seeing how they would apply. But for simple things like we were talking about, like royalties and licensing, I think there's opportunity. But yeah, if you're listening and have a smart contract that you're thinking of adopting, definitely get a lawyer to run over it. Because once you sign it, once it's activated, there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, it's going to be really difficult.
If you don't understand your risk, or where the potential gaps are, then there's not much you can do after the fact.
And if the other side has used a lawyer to tweak it slightly, you could be in a real difficult spot. The other point around smart contracts I saw talking to these insurance guys was, it wasn't necessarily the payout side, which is obviously great, but it was also the fact that you could have effectively a live policy on the blockchain. So if you're a contractor, right, and you're coming into where we're recording this podcast to do some electrical work, every chance is you should be providing some kind of insurance policy, whether that's public liability, or I don't know exactly what the rules are here, but some kind of insurance. But a lot of the time that's all done by trust, right? You say, have you got a policy? I say, yeah, here's a document. You look at the document. You've got no idea if that policy is live or not, apart from the fact that you can see a document. Sure. Do you ever phone the insurance company and check that policy is actually live? So what these guys were talking about was, actually, if we put that insurance document or the contract on chain, you would see on chain if it had been accepted, if it had been cancelled, if there had been any defaults, or if there was any circumstances where claims, you could even have claims as kind of tags underneath that. So you'd actually be able to see like a history and a kind of audit trail of what this insurance policy has done and how it's worked. And I thought that was a really, really clever way to, it doesn't necessarily affect the legal basis, but it allows visibility and kind of transparency around something. I thought that was a really interesting use case.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Although then it's just kind of making me think, like, whilst you open up the openness and the clarity and the visibility on these things, at what point is it kind of too open that people lose their privacy in that regard too?
Yeah.
So, there's a beauty of open source and things being on chain, through using blockchain. But at what point is it too open?
Yeah, and that data privacy is something we spoke about before we kind of kicked off around that. It is a subject of some people like it, some people want it to be completely closed and nobody can see it. So you've got to get that balance right, but you can't have it both ways in a sense, can you? If you're going to build a business on the basis that your insurance documents are on chain, I guess you'd say if you don't like that, go to another insurance firm. But if you revolutionize the whole industry, then what?
Yeah.
And like you say, data privacy laws around the world are quite strict.
It's reminding me of all those like futuristic TV shows where you kind of have a social score and you can kind of see if someone's, paid all their bills because they have a high social score, and it becomes very visible. Like I'm not saying that's where we're going, but I think has a lot of benefits, but I think it's just interesting to think about it from a personal kind of privacy point of view?
Yeah, and we're kind of, which is the typical crypto thing, we're kind of getting down the rabbit hole a little bit here. But the other thing I have then thought about is you are able to kind of lock, if you like. So I could say the only person that you can view this, but only if I give you access to view it.
Right. So it's like a Dropbox link.
Yeah, but on chain. So there's no kind of there's no way I could manipulate the data that I'm showing you. Right. But we obviously get down that rabbit hole. But it's a super fascinating space. I think that kind of legal contract on chain visibility, I think, is a really interesting space. So I wanted to also then move away from the crypto Web3 world and just talk a little bit about your podcast, The Balance Theory. When did you start it?
4.5 years ago.
Wow. Yeah. So you've been going and you've got, I think I wrote down, you've got 130,000 subscribers
on YouTube. Yep.
4.5 million plus views.
Yep.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
We could only dream of having that level. So that, it must be a real validation to you that people really want to, see your content and hear from the people that you're talking to. And what made you decide to, you mentioned at the start that it was kind of personally you wanted to, but what made you kind of get into it?
So at the time I was working in a corporate kind of environment. I was working in a law firm and I felt really boxed in. So like I was kind of explaining before, I was working in a team where I was doing the same thing for many clients. And in law, it's quite, I'm not sure what it's like in accounting, but you kind of have different roles. You move up. You're a junior associate, senior associate, partner. And that process is quite rigid. And the opportunities and the type of work they give you is heavily based not on merit, but on your role and your kind of position, not your ability. So I had all this curiosity and interest and I wanted to take on more work and they just wouldn't give it to me because I was a junior lawyer. There was that. Then there was this feeling I was coming home every day and I was just feeling so drained. And so it really forced me to reflect. I think a lot of people in the corporate world can resonate with this. Like this feeling of like they're made for more and just feeling drained from their job. So it really forced me to think about, well, what am I not getting from my job? And I realized I was putting so much pressure on my job to be the thing that completed me, the thing that kind of made my life. You grow up thinking, I'm going to go to uni, I'm going to study this thing, and then I'm going to build a life around this. And I realized I had it really backward because a job, yes, it's a big part of what I do every single week, but it's not everything I am. And I'm a lot of things outside of that. So it forced me into this really introspective mode where I was like, okay, what am I missing from this job that's not filling my soul? And for me, it was genuine connection with people. Like I always say, when I used to go to 18th, 21st, I'd be that person in the back corner having a full-blown D&M with someone. I just always took conversation to a deep level. It's just where I'm drawn to and what I'm interested in. And in my job, it was literally me in the paper all day. Even if I talked to people, it was very surface level. It wasn't anything deep. So I was like, how do I engage in this? How do I kind of supplement what I'm doing every day at work so I have an outlet for this thing that I care about so much that I'm not getting any exposure to? And I landed on podcasting. And then there's the whole question of, well, I want to start a podcast. What do I even start it on? And at the time I was really interested in personal development. I was reading a lot of things. I was listening to other podcasts. And so it just seemed like a natural extension of something I was genuinely curious in. And I always say to people, I'm not an expert in balance because the balance theory, the idea of it is exploring the concept of work-life balance. Because I was in this frame of mind where I thought I have to give up everything to be successful as a lawyer. I have to put all my eggs in this basket and I have to grind for 5 years and hate my life to get to be successful. I had that mentality. But at the same time, I was very conflicted because I really value my relationships. I really value my health. And I know that when I prioritize those things, I'm a better version of myself at work. So I was like, I need to just change the way I'm looking at this. So the podcast kind of started around this idea of balance. And the anchor for me was I want to learn how other people do it. And I want to start being exposed to different ideas, not just this one, I have to struggle and bust my ass until I get somewhere. How do I do this in a more sustainable way? And so it's really just been a project of me learning from other people. I do kind of a mix of interviews and my own solo episodes. So the solos are me just sharing things
Reflecting.
I've been, really introspective on. And my goal is to just challenge other people to be curious in their own lives. Because when we get curious, we can work out what's aligned, what's not, what are we settling for, what can we be pushing ourselves in, what do we actually want, and kind of separating that from what I thought I wanted, what society's told me I wanted, what my pre-existing notion of success is versus maybe what I actually want. It's this idea of just constantly growing. And like you said, podcasting's been a great way for me to connect with people that I would never probably meet on the street.
Yeah.
I'd never run in the same circles as. And it's just grown. And I think because it's come from this really organic, curiosity-led space, I think people just are feeling the same way as me. And so they're just tacking on to my endeavors and my explorations. So I love it. It's been something that has been a big part of my life. And 4.5 years, haven't missed a week outside of my season breaks.
That's incredible.
Thank you.
What I love about it as well is that for you, the topic you're talking about, a lot of people don't want to talk about publicly in a sense of like, they don't want to say, oh, I'm thinking about what my work-life balance might look like, or what this might look like. But actually having a podcast like this gives people the opportunity to kind of listen like anonymously, if that makes sense. So they don't have to come out as this big, brash person that then has to look at their kind of more sensitive side, if you like. They can actually do it in private, which I think is one amazing thing about the way podcasts have grown so much, is that it does give people the opportunity to maybe in their own time, think about these things rather than it being thrown in their face.
Yeah.
And I know I'm one of those people that if somebody throws something in my face, I hate it.
Not interested.
I'm totally against it. Whereas if somebody gives me the opportunity to listen in my own time, take it in my own kind of way, then I'm much more likely to take on board that kind of thing. I do think the topic of balance is interesting because, everyone uses the word work-life balance, but in principle, balance is 50-50. Anything other than that, in the technical word of what a balance is, anything other than that isn't balanced, right? So I do find it super interesting because people say you need work-life balance, and I go, does anybody have a true balance, right? A true balance one way or the other way. But also you mentioned, you felt that you had to go through this 5 years of, grind and hate your life and all those sorts of things. But I personally, as an individual, I'm kind of like, I actually love that. If I didn't have that, if I had a more natural work-life balance that people might suggest, I wouldn't feel as happy as I do. So it's a super interesting topic, I think.
Yeah, and you've touched on something that is a very big basis of the show, which is when I started, I felt this massive friction trying to achieve work-life balance because I was running around like a headless chook, trying to make time for the gym, trying to make time for relationships, trying to work. And I felt guilty a lot of the time.
You put this pressure on yourself.
Yeah, I felt so guilty. And then it really took me stepping back and saying, well, what does balance look like for me right now, today? And that definition not only changes from person to person because it depends on your goals, right?
Yep.
It actually changes for yourself at different moments in time. And another kind of angle of this is if you're trying to push your targets by 10x in 1 year for your business, that's going to require you to work a seriously more amount of time. It's going to require you to invest a lot more energy. My angle of that, and very, very briefly, the balance theory concept is you've got your health, your relationships, and your fulfillment. So if you know that it's a work season, like I'm going to put everything into work for the next 2 years because I have these goals, that's great. Go for it. Work your 20-hour days. But know what your health and relationships need to be sustained. Because I talk about them like gardens. And if you completely ignore a garden, it's going to die and wilt. And by the time you finish your 2-3 year goal, a lot of people go through these cycles where they're burnt out. Their health takes a massive toll. Then they have to kind of backtrack and spend all this time getting it back up to scratch. Whereas if you can say, you know what, I know I need 7 hours sleep and I know I need to have a good diet and move 3 times a week. If you can just maintain that while you're working on this massive goal, that's your balance.
Yeah.
Right? You're not neglecting anything. So the premise of it is work out what are your non-negotiables in each area and then let the seasons of life take their toll.
Yeah, I love that. And that is a really good way to take it. And my encouragement here is, listen to the podcast and take what you can from it as well, but also take what works for you. I think that's the key. What I love about what you've just said is nothing what you've just said is forcing something on somebody. it's all about you take from that how you know, how you feel you need to, or how you feel you should.
Yeah.
And if you want to take it all, great. If you don't, you know, but you feel
Precisely.
you've got a different perspective,
Yeah.
you know, totally fine. So
my angle's always been, like I said, I'm not an expert. I just feel I've come up with an approach that is flexible enough that everyone can make it make sense for themselves. And the idea is not to say, oh, this person has this kind of split in their life, or they're, you know, prioritizing X, Y, Z. You have to make that make sense for you depending on your own goals and priorities right now. That's the only way it's going to work for you.
Yeah, that's the way the balance, I guess, comes in. What
That's
is the
right.
right balance for you?
Right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, fascinating, amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
You. I actually felt pressure on this one. The first time I felt pressure because I'm like a successful podcaster sat opposite me, and I
couldn't even tell.
But no, it's been really good, and obviously we'll put some links in the description and stuff. But where can people find you if they want to?
So podcast, it's the Balance Theory podcast on every platform, YouTube, Instagram. If it's on a legal capacity, my email address is erica@yourlegalstrategist.com. You can put a link to that. I'm very open. Or on LinkedIn, Erika De Pellegrin as well. So always open for a chat.
Thank you so much, Erika.
Thanks for having me.
No worries.